Let's get ready to read. And anyone who's lurking, enjoy your lurk. I know Thursday is a big work lurk day for people. So if you're lurking, enjoy. I hope you enjoy the story. And here we go. So, chapter 9, Hard, Hungry Work. Instead of getting easier as the days went on, work for the people of Ember got harder. It wasn't just the work, it was the heat they had to work in. Every day was hotter than the last. Dune had never felt this warm in his life. It was like being cooked. All the people of Ember felt this way. They sweated, their skin turned red and stung and peeled off, and the brightness of the sky hurt their eyes. They got terrible headaches. Sometimes one of them would drop to the ground in a faint just from being too hot. At times like these, people thought, this is a dreadful place we have come to. They put their hands over their eyes, missing the familiar darkness. The team leaders tried to be understanding when their workers dropped and fainted, but the people of Sparks were used to the heat. Besides them, the people of Ember seemed like weaklings. A few times, Dune saw the leader of his team press his lips together and drum his fingers against his leg when one of the Emberites had to sit down and rest. Dune's team leader was Chugger Frisk, a big, stubble-jawed man who didn't talk much except to give directions. Every day, he sent his team wherever it was most needed. Dune did all kinds of jobs over the next few weeks. He dug ditches for the pipes that conducted water from the river to the crops in the fields. He repaired the wagons that hauled the produce home from the fields. He milked the goats out in the goat pasture and made sure the water troughs for the oxen were full. He picked fruit, built fences, planted seeds, stirred vats of soap, and dug chicken droppings into the cabbage field. Except for being so hot, he didn't mind the work. He was getting strong, and he liked being strong. He liked feeling the muscles in his arms getting harder, and he liked being taller. He knew he was taller because his old pants were too short. The feeling of being a new person in this new world stayed with him. He would be 13 soon, not a child anymore. Work was making him sturdy and ready for anything. Besides, as he worked, he was finding out all kinds of things he wanted to learn. How did the pumps work that brought water up from the river to the fields? How was cheese made, and shoes, and candles? Where did they get the ice that kept things cold in their big ice house? What were the bushy-tailed animals that scurried up trees, and the long rope-like animals that he sometimes almost stepped on in the grass? He wanted to know how houses were built, and what glass was made of, and how bicycles worked. It was exciting having so much to learn, but every time he remembered that he and his people had less than 6 months to learn it, less than 6 months to master all the skills they would need to build a town of their own, a worm of fear twisted in his stomach. Chugger wouldn't answer questions. He was too busy giving directions or working, so Dune often asked his questions at lunch. Sometimes Ordney answered him, sometimes Martha did. Ordney's answers were more like lectures, and Martha's were more like boasts. After a while, it was clear that both of them were getting tired of questions, so Dune asked fewer of them. One day, Kenny followed him outside after lunch and stretched up to whisper in his ear. "I can show you where there's answers to your questions," he said. "Want me to?" "Sure," said Dune. "Right now?" said Kenny. "Okay," said Dune. Kenny led him through the streets of the village, going first toward the river and then away from it, along a street that led out away from the houses and into a grove of oak trees. "There," said Kenny, pointing ahead. At first, Dune saw only the long line of a roof above the trees. Then the street opened out into a big empty space that, he could see, had once been covered with pavement. Now the pavement was cracked and weeds grew up through it. To the left of this span of pavement stood a huge building, a rectangular structure so tremendous it could have held both the Ember School and the Gathering Hall. At the end, facing them, were two massive wooden doors, which Kenny walked toward. In the ancient days, Kenny said, you didn't have to open these. They were made of glass, and they had eyes and opened as soon as they saw you. That can't be, said June. It was, though, Kenny said. Above the doors was a sign missing most of its letters. It was a long sign, so you could tell whatever it used to say was a long word. But now all it said was UPEARK. What does that mean? June asked, pointing to the sign. I don't know, Kenny said. We just call it the Ark. It's our storehouse. We're going around to the back. He led the way around the side of the building to a small door in the back wall, which he opened. He had to push hard because something was behind the door that had to be shoved out of the way. June peered into the darkness. At first, he couldn't make out what he was seeing. Lumpy mountains appeared to fill the room to the ceiling and spread from wall to wall. He took a step forward, but his foot jammed against something hard on the floor. There's answers to everything in here, said Kenny. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, June saw that the room was full of, was it boxes? No, they almost looked like books. They lay in toppling stacks, giant heaps, sliding mounds, as if they had been dumped in from an enormous bucket. Some of them lay open where their pages crumpled. Some were so warped that their covers curved. A smell of ancient dust and mold arose from them. He reached down and picked one up. It was covered with dust. He opened it and saw pages of tiny, neat printing. It was a book, yes. Not like the books of Ember. These were much bigger and sturdier and had much more writing. He riffled through the pages. More dust flew up. But he couldn't tell what the book was about. One page said, Chapter 15, The Thermodynamics of Aluminum. He had no idea what that meant. This is amazing, said June. Can I take some of these back to the hotel? I guess so, said Kenny. No one will notice. June set down the book about thermodynamics. He brushed his smudged fingers against his pants. He felt like a hungry person who had been led to an immense banquet, far more food than he could eat in his whole life. He was starving all of a sudden for the knowledge hidden in these books. He reached out and chose 3 of them blindly, not even looking at the titles. Don't you want some? He said to Kenny. No, said Kenny. I already read 4 books in school. That was enough. We learned about history, pre and post. Pre and post? Pre-disaster and post-disaster. Oh, said June. What do you like to do then? He asked. Just poke around, said Kenny. I poke around in the woods. You could come with me sometime, he said, looking up at June with hopeful eyes, if you want. Maybe I will, June said, though he was thinking probably he wouldn't. He had so many other things in mind to do. Besides, Kenny was a little young to be his friend. During the first week after the Emberites arrived, Martha Parton had showed off her cooking skills at lunch every day. She made mashed potato pie, fresh peas with chives, walnut croquettes, mushroom gravy, cheese popovers, red onion and bean dumplings, scrambled eggs with tomato jam, apricot pudding, and apple butter cookies. Every time she brought in a new dish, she said, I don't imagine you had these where you came from, or this will be new to you. And the Ember guest would say, You're right, we've never had this. We've never tasted anything so delicious. It's wonderful. And Martha's mouth would crimp into a small, pleased smile. As time went on, however, the food at lunchtime became plainer. Martha got tired of making something new every day to impress her guests. What they found in their dinner and breakfast parcels became less interesting, too. Usually it was some chunks of cornbread, 10 or 12 carrot sticks, and a few slimy bits of goat cheese. If they were lucky, there might be a hard-boiled egg. Martha took to mentioning, as if it were a little joke, that even though the Partons were given extra food from the storehouse because of the extra people, it seemed as if they had less. Wasn't that odd? June started to feel hungry a fair amount of the time, and he knew others did too. His father never spoke about it, but Edward Pocket griped about the food every evening. I know I'm old and small, he'd say, polishing off the last crumbs of both his dinner and his breakfast, but that doesn't mean I can live on air. One day, Orny made a disturbing announcement. The cabbage crop, he said, was going to be smaller than expected. Worms had gotten into it. They'd have only about 2/3 of the cabbage they had last year. After this, not only was the food at lunchtime plainer, but there was less of it. One week, they had string beans, last year's pickled cabbage, and goat's milk pudding for lunch 4 days in a row, and when they opened their baskets at dinner time, they found only a bottle of cold potato soup to serve as both dinner and breakfast. Clary had started a garden just a few days after the Embrights arrived at the Pioneer Hotel. She cleared a patch of ground about 40 feet square, not far from the riverbank, and planted seeds that she had brought from Ember. Children who were too little to go to work in the village helped her pull weeds and fetch buckets of water from the river. Old people sat in the shade giving her advice. After a while, green shoots appeared in rows on the patch of dirt, and Clary was out there every morning and every evening tending them. In several weeks, there would be a little extra food for the people of Ember out in their own front yard. But it wouldn't be nearly enough. Some people were already grumbling about their skimpy dinner parcels. One night, when Dune was in room 215, eating with his father and the others, he heard voices in the hall and went out to see a cluster of people a few doors down. Lizzie was there. Dune spotted the red cloud of her hair. Tick was there, too. His voice carried above the rest. Well, I got 3 carrots, a plum, and a chunk of sour cheese, he said. Lucky me. That ought to keep me going for a while. A few people laughed dryly at this. Dune heard Lizzie giggle. It'll keep you going for maybe half an hour, someone said. I don't know how they think we can work with nothing but scraps to eat. Along the hall, other doors opened and other voices joined in. All I got was some limp green beans and a few clumps of porridge. I've had carrot soup 3 days in a row. Some people counseled patience. We shouldn't complain, someone said. It's hard for them to give us food. We should be grateful for... I'm tired of being grateful, someone else broke in. They promised to feed us, but they're starving us instead. It seems to me, said Tick, that we should do something about this. I think maybe I'll mention the problem at lunch tomorrow. Maybe we all should. Maybe we should tell them it's very hard to work when you're hungry. I'll tell them, cried Lizzie's high voice, and other voices rose in agreement. An excited, angry babble filled the hallway, drowning out those who spoke for patience. I'll speak up. We have to protest. Tick is so right. Tick for mayor, someone shouted, laughing. For a second, Tick looked surprised. Then his eyes glowed with pleasure. He raised a fist in the air. We'll stand up for ourselves, he said, and the people around him roared and raised their fists too. Dune turned to his father and Edward and Sadge, who had all come to the door to see what was going on. We should tell the Partons, he said. If we're working, we need enough to eat. It's only fair. Of course, they don't have to give us anything, said Dune's father. They're giving what they think they can spare. He looked sadly at the dry chunk of cornbread in his hand. But I suppose it can't hurt to mention it, he said, without being rude, of course. I imagine they're doing the best they can. Mrs. Polster agreed to be the one to bring the matter up. She did so at lunch the next day. They were having cold spinach soup. I have a request, she said firmly. She set down her soup spoon. Everyone looked at her. Dune felt a jitter in his stomach. We have noticed, said Mrs. Polster, that the food parcels you so generously give us have become considerably smaller lately. We find that when we have eaten what is within, we are still, to be frank, hungry. This is a difficulty for us. There was silence. Everyone stared at Mrs. Polster, who sat very calmly with her hands in her lap, waiting for an answer. What? Said Martha Parton at last. Did I hear you right? I believe so, said Mrs. Polster, unless you have ear trouble. I said we're not getting quite enough to eat. Martha laughed a one-note laugh, a laugh of disbelief. Kenny stopped chewing and looked frightened. Ordney drew himself up and cleared his throat. I'm surprised, he said. I had thought you people understood the situation. We do indeed, said Dune's father hastily. We're very grateful for what you've done for us. It's just that we're working quite hard, said Clary. It's a very small amount, said Mrs. Thorne timidly. For both dinner and breakfast, added Edward Pocket. Last night, said Dune, I had a boiled egg and 3 carrots for dinner, and nothing for breakfast this morning. There was silence again, a terrible, vibrating silence. Then, Ordney leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table with his fingertips. Now listen here, he said. We're doing the best we can with what has been asked of us, and I must say, a great deal has been asked. Suddenly, we're supposed to feed twice as many people as before, more than twice as many. He glared at the Emberites, shifting his eyes to each one in turn. And yet we do not have twice as much food as we did before. It's true that each family is being given a little extra from the storehouse for this emergency, but not much. Sparks Village just does not have enough for 400 extra people. Are we supposed to feed you instead of our own families? Why should we? Who are you, anyway? You strangers from some city no one's ever heard of. By the end of the speech, Ordney's face was a deep red, and his voice was shaking with rage. Dune felt frozen. All he could think was, he's right. Of course he's right. But we're right, too. Everyone else must have been thinking the same thing. They finished their soup in silence. At the end of the meal, Martha dumped the food parcels on the table instead of handing them out. They each took one, but Dune's father was the only person who said thank you. Later, when Dune opened his parcel, he found a wedge of cabbage leaves turning yellow at the edges and a hunk of some sort of bean bake. His stomach clenched. They're tired of helping us, he thought. What are we going to do? End of chapter 9. Welcome in, Lone Wolf Pack, Matthew and Paige. Hello, happy Thursday. How are you all doing? Good morning. Not an ad for older and special needs dogs by Subaru. Oh my god. That must be adorable. That must be actually adorable. I need a little stretch in between the chapter. Sorry, I was in an ad. Hello, welcome in. Happy Thursday. Paige, how are you doing? How's it going? Ugh, that stretch felt so good. Definitely needed it. Definitely needed it. We're having a nice, cozy time reading after a kind of stressful morning. So I'm definitely loving this reading today, and I hope you are too. I'm okay. I turned 31 in under 24 hours. Aw, that's exciting. Happy almost birthday. Yeah, I've been having a stressful morning and not like anything crazy, just life happening and having to deal with it, but it is what it is. And now we're having a nice, cozy reading time, so that's good. Yeah, trying to stay positive because lately there's just been a lot of negative and my brain just can't handle all the negative. It just can't. So, Fiona the dog says hello. Oh my gosh. Hello, Fiona. Happy Thursday. A lot of negative for me too. Ugh, I hate that. I just hate it. Like, sometimes when people are just saying negative things, I'm just like, listen, please stop. Okay? Please stop. I can't take it anymore. And that's just it. That's just it. I think the eclipse messed people up. Stuff going on in the universe. Oh my god, did the eclipse happen? Did I miss it? Did I miss it? I remember like reading that there was going to be one. And I like usually I'll save like an alarm in my phone to try to see it. especially like when there's a full moon or a special moon. It was Saturday. Aw, I missed it. That's how I am when people are toxically positive. Aw. Summer, hello. Welcome in. Happy Thursday. Oh, I'm not sure if you would have been able to see it from the East Coast, though. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Welcome in, Summer. How are you doing? We're right in the middle of a chapter. Well, no, we just ended a chapter. We're right in between chapters is what I meant. That's what I meant. But yeah, how are you guys doing? Hope you're having good mornings. Better mornings than I've had today. All right, I think I'm ready to start the next chapter. How far into this book are you? So we're going to be starting chapter 10, and I believe, let me just double check. I believe there's 30 chapters. 29 chapters. So yeah, we're about a third of the way. We are about a third of the way. Need to do some reading myself. Pretty neutral morning for me so far. That's good. That's good. I was actually reading a little bit this morning when I was waiting in line for something. So, but I haven't really been like super reading much lately. I'm kind of like in between books at the moment. Was it one of the weird middle chapters? Would I have missed too much? So the only thing you missed in this past chapter is like the Ember people are getting hungry and they are now starting to vocally complain to the people of Sparks that they are hungry and not getting enough food. That's really all you missed. So not much, not much. I'm doing well. I hope your days get better. Yes, I hope so too. I'm just ready for I'm taking a short vacation. So this will actually be my last stream for about a week. I'll come back like towards the end of next week. So not a lot of time off, just a few days. I'm deep into Emma by Jane Austen. I don't think I've ever read a Jane Austen book, to be honest. But I've heard they're good. Oh my goodness. Need a yawn. Needed a yawn. Vacay hype. Oh my gosh, I am so excited. I just I'm worried that I'm going to be too stressed to enjoy my vacation. And I really hope that doesn't happen because I really need it. I really need a little break. I love Austen. I'll have to try one of her books one time. I'm in a class for it right now. Can't remember if I said, oh, are you? I can't remember either, to be honest. But that's awesome. Okay. We just got back from our vacay last Friday. Oh, how was it? How was it? I hope you had the best time. I'm going to read the next chapter and then I'll get to the answers. Or back to chat, I should say. Chapter 10, Restless Weeks. Poppy was now almost well. She still slept more than usual, but when she wasn't sleeping, she tromped around the doctor's house, pulling spoons off the table and spilling cups of water and crumpling pages of books. That is, she was almost her old self. So Lena often asked Mrs. Murdo if it wasn't time for them to go and live with the others at the Pioneer Hotel. Mrs. Murdo always said she wasn't quite ready. They'd wait until the brother came, she said. Lena had a feeling the real reason was that she liked helping the doctor. She was always poring over the doctor's big medicine books and helping her pick the herbs and mix her remedies, so they stayed on. And Lena worked for the doctor. It wasn't that she didn't like working, but in Ember, she'd had an adventurous job, an important job. She'd run with her messages all over the city, running the way she used to love to run, so fast she almost flew. It was hard for her to stay in one place all day. She felt restless and bored. She did a huge amount of cooking. Well, not cooking exactly, since the doctor rarely wanted to bother making a fire in the stove, but chopping and peeling and slicing and mixing. She wiped up spilled medicines and herbal solutions from the counters. She swept dirt from the floor, She pulled down cobwebs from the ceiling. There were always rags to be torn into bandages. There were always herbs to be pounded into powder, and bottles to be labeled, and plants to be watered. While everyone else was out in the village, doing new, interesting things and meeting new people, Lena was stuck doing housework. One day, she asked the doctor if there were any extra paper she could use for drawing. There wasn't, the doctor said, but if she could find blank pages at the backs of books, she could use those. So Lena tore out 8 blank pages. The doctor gave her a pencil, and she began drawing whatever she had a few minutes of free time. Out of habit, she drew the city she had always drawn. She hardly knew how to draw anything else, but she thought that since she was here in the real world, she should be able to imagine the city much better than before. She remembered the first drawing she'd done with her colored pencils back in Ember, when she'd made the sky blue instead of its normal black. She had thought it was just an imaginary thing, a little crazy to draw blue sky. But now look, the sky really was blue. She must have known it somehow, in some secret place in her mind. Something in her was a little bit magic, maybe. She could see beyond what was right in front of her eyes to things that used to be, or things that could be in the future. So she shut her eyes and tried to look deep into her imagination. But the old version of the city, the one she'd drawn so many times, seemed to be stamped inside her eyelids. She kept drawing the same thing. The tall buildings, the lighted windows. She added a few extras, some trees, a couple of trucks with their oxen, a chicken, but it didn't look quite right. Would the buildings be taller than the trees? How much taller? Would there be chickens in the city? She felt discouraged, so she set aside her city drawings and tried to draw what she saw around her. She drew the lemon tree outside the doctor's back door. She drew her bike. She drew the front of the doctor's house and the gate and the grapevine over the door. Once a truck parked a little way up the road to unload some crates, and she dashed out with her paper and pencil and drew the truck and its oxen. But none of these gave her quite the same thrill as drawing the city. There was a feeling that went with drawing the city, a feeling of longing and excitement and mystery. It was as if her drawings of the city were a half-open window, a glimpse of something she couldn't quite see clearly. Torrin sometimes came up behind her when she was drawing and peered over her shoulder. Now and then he would point out some part of the picture that didn't look quite right, but most of the time he didn't comment at all. He was hopping with impatience these days, waiting for his brother to come home. "He'll be bringing me something," he said one day. "Every time he comes home, he brings me something." He went to the window seat and took his big bag of treasures from the cabinet beneath. "I'll show you these," he said to Lena, "if you promise not to touch them." Lena wandered over. She didn't want to appear too interested, since Torrin was certainly never interested in anything she did, but she was curious about these prized possessions he'd been hiding. He reached into the bag and took out one thing at a time, placing it carefully on the window ledge. There were 6 things, all different. Lena could not identify a single one of them. "Casper brought me these," Torrin said. He lined them up, making tiny adjustments to their positions until he got them just right. "They're all extinct." Lena took a step closer and bent down to look. "Don't touch them," Torrin cried. "I'm not," said Lena irritably. "What are they?" Torrin pointed to the first thing, which was shaped like a T and made of scratched silver metal. "An airplane," Torrin said. "It carried people through the air." "Oh, come on," said Lena. "It's not even a foot long." "Real airplanes did," Torrin said. "This is just a model of a real airplane." He pointed to the next one. "A tank," he said. "It runs over people and crushes them." "What's the point of that?" Lena asked. Torrin sighed at Lena's stupidity. "It's for fighting enemies," he said. The next thing looked like a short, chubby bike. "Motorcycle," said Torrin. "It goes really fast." Then came a battered silver tube. "Flashlight. You push this button and light comes out." "Show me," Lena said. "It doesn't work," said Torrin. "I told you, all these things are extinct." The next thing was a black rectangle with rows of small colored buttons. "Remote," said Torrin. "What's it for?" "It makes things happen when you press the buttons." What kind of things? Just things, said Torin. I don't know. It's very technical. The last thing was different from all the rest. It seemed to be an animal made of some stiff grayish material. It stood about 10 inches high on 4 thick feet. Elephant, Torin said, as tall as a house. Tall as a house? Lena tried to imagine it. You mean if I stood next to one, I'd only come up to here? She pointed at the creature's knee. Torin swatted her hand away. It was the biggest animal on Earth, he said. If it wrapped its nose around you, you'd die. I'd love to see one, Lena said. You can't. There aren't any more. Torin spread his arms out, hiding his treasures from view. You have to go away now, he said. You only get one look. So Lena went out into the courtyard and picked a few green grapes, which turned out to be much too hard and sour to eat. Through the window, she could see Torin moving the tank and the motorcycle toward each other, and she could hear him making growling and crashing noises. What must the ancient world have been like, she wondered, with all these strange things moving around in it? Was it wonderful or terrible? One afternoon, when Lena was in the village picking up some salt for the doctor, she saw a long line of people at a clothing shop. A few Emberites were among them. Lizzie was in line, wearing the black scarf around her neck that she'd worn ever since she arrived, to show that she was mourning for Looper, her boyfriend back in Ember. Why are there so many people here? Lena asked. They have eyeglasses, Lena said. A roamer brought in a special load of them yesterday. Glasses? But you don't wear glasses. These are dark glasses, Lena said. They call them sunglasses. They make it so the light doesn't hurt your eyes as much. Most of the people of Sparks already had sunglasses. A couple of the work leaders, understanding how much the light bothered the Emberites' eyes, traded some extra wooden crates for a couple boxes of the glasses and gave them out for free. Lena tried some on, but didn't like them because they made all the green look brownish. She also thought they made people look sneaky, as if they had evil secret plans. Lena liked going to the market plaza. It was always alive with people and animals, and the markets had things she'd never seen before. Sandals made out of old truck tires, hats and baskets woven of straw. It was a noisy, bustling, interesting place. It was also very messy. The animals made the mess. Goats and oxen, pulling carts in from the fields, left their big, smelly plops all over. They got cleaned up eventually. Someone came and scraped them into the buckets and took them away. But often this didn't happen until halfway through the morning, and people had to step carefully until then and breathe in that powerful smell. This gave Lena a good idea. She would do a favor for the marketplace, she decided. Everyone would appreciate it. So the next morning, just at dawn, she rode her bike down to the plaza with a big bucket hanging from the handlebars. She scooped up a load of cow plops and goat plops and dumped it into the river. Back and forth from the plaza to the river she went, scraping up one smelly, squashy load after another, and when she was just about to dump the last load, one of the shopkeepers arrived. She smiled at him, expecting some words of approval, but instead his face twisted in rage. "What are you doing?" he shouted. He started running toward her. "Dumping that good stuff in the river?" He seemed unable to believe his eyes. "What is the matter with you?" Good stuff, thought Lena. What was he talking about? He snatched the bucket out of her hand. "You people are..." He stopped. He pressed his lips together and closed his eyes for a moment. "All right," he said in a tight voice. "I suppose you didn't know. This stuff is precious. You do not throw it in the river." Lena took a step backward. She felt as if she'd been slapped. "Oh," she said, "then what do you do with it?" "It goes out to the fields," the man said. "It goes into the rotting pile, and when it's ready, they dig into the ground. It's fertilizer. I guess you've never heard of it." "No," said Lena. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I was trying to be helpful." "The most helpful thing you people could do would be to... well, never mind." He gave Lena a last disgusted look and walked away, leaving her with a half-filled bucket she didn't know what to do with. She carried it out to the village and up the road, and when no one was around, she dumped its contents at the side of a field. It wasn't only Lena who got into this kind of trouble. As time went on, she heard about other people doing or saying the wrong thing and irritating the people of Sparks. Sometimes it was because they seemed stupid. People from Ember were frightened by chickens, had never seen a cloud, and didn't know the meaning of ordinary words like storm and forest and cat and lemon. They knew nothing about history. They'd never heard of other countries. They didn't even know that the earth was round like a ball. To the villagers, they seemed unbelievably dumb. On the other hand, they sometimes acted a bit superior, boasting of the things they had in their underground city. The villagers didn't like hearing that in Ember people had electric lights and flush toilets and hot and cold running water. Once, when Lister Monk, who had been the pipeworks supervisor, was telling a Sparks man about the generator, the man called him a liar. When Lister protested that he was telling the truth and implied that Sparks was rather backward placed compared to Ember, the man hit him. It took 5 people to break up the fight. Worst of all was the ravenous hunger of the Emberites. The village families were pleased that these strangers were so impressed by their fruits and vegetables, but they were also worried. Their leaders had told them the newcomers were to be fed, and all households were being supplied with extra food for the purpose. But the people of Ember never seemed to get full. They cleaned every last crumb off their plates, asked for seconds, finished those off, and then sat there looking hungry. The villagers resented it. Sometimes Lena overheard them talking in the markets. "It's too much to ask," she heard a woman grumbling, "and these cave people are going to be here nearly 5 more months. Am I going to have to give them some of my strawberry crop? I don't see why I should." And another woman was even more direct. "I wish they would just get out," she said. "It's hard enough to feed your own family, much less a bunch of strangers." Lena wasn't used to feeling unwanted. She didn't like it. There were plenty of things about this place she didn't like. The dust that coated her feet and legs, for instance, turning them a yellowish brown. The tiny bugs that bit her and made red itchy spots on her arms. The way the sun burned the back of her neck. This place wasn't so perfect. She wanted to tell those crabby villagers. In Ember, for instance, they didn't have so many mean, snotty people as they did here. Lena sometimes rode down to the Pioneer Hotel to see Dune. He was always seemed to be glad to see her, but it wasn't the same as it had been back in Ember, when they were involved in the desperate search for a way out of their doomed city. Dune showed her around the Pioneer, and he told her about the work he did and the people he ate lunch with, but he seemed distracted or troubled, as if he was trying to solve a problem that he wasn't telling her about. Lena would ride back to the doctor's house after these visits with thoughts struggling against each other in her mind. She missed the old Dune, her clever, adventurous partner, and she herself felt different here too. She didn't know what to do or how to be. Some of the people were trying to be kind, but there was so much unkindness mixed in with the kindness. To the people of Sparks, the people of Ember were just a nuisance. How could they stay in a place where they weren't wanted? This world was huge. There must be another place in it for the people of Ember. End of chapter 10. You just grab a drink of coffee. Much needed. Much needed. Okay, let me go back. Okay. I would start with Pride and Prejudice. Okay. I actually saw at work there's like a new retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and I thought about maybe reading that. But I didn't know if I should actually start with like the original book. How was it? Sunbutt? Oh my god, Sunbutt. That's your new name, apparently. I like it. It was so needed. A lot of de-stressing tears in the best way. Aw. The weather was beautiful and the house we stayed in was so nice. Aw, it was fun. We went with my family, siblings, and spouses included. So it was a bit chaotic in that way, but everyone was chill enough to give each other space. Oh, that's awesome. That sounds amazing. Samba isn't the worst thing I've been called. I would take Samba as a compliment. Yeah, right? It is kind of cute. How's little baby? It just means I have a great butt. Exactly. Baby's chilling. They're just wiggling away in the limited space available to them. We're ready to meet them. Aww. Can't wait. Just thinking about Collie's reaction when she reads this combo. Less than a month away. Oh my gosh, that is exciting. The OBGYN tried to tell me November 7th was a more accurate due date, but they also ignored several things about my cycle, so I don't believe them. But I also wouldn't be surprised if the baby was a little early. I feel like firstborns are usually early, right? Or I could be wrong. I was very early. Not very, but like I was pretty early. And I was a firstborn. That would be wild if you and Sarah gave birth on the same day. She's due on the 8th, but I know she's feeling like it could be any day. Oh my gosh. I got to feel her wiggling around. Aw. That's crazy. I can't I've never touched a baby inside a stomach, and I'm like, part of me does not want to. I feel like that would just be so strange. I'm going to learn so much about babies just from you all. Yes. Cute baby wiggles. You really can't help but learn when so many people are having kids. Exactly. Truck tire sandals must get good traction. I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. They're probably very, very efficient. Good thing they're not on the Oregon Trail. Oh my gosh, good thing. Or everyone would be getting dysentery. I've even started learning because of a Disney YouTuber I watch and just following their journey with their second kid. Aw. Flat earthers. Makes sense. Yes. These things seem a little rough here. Yeah. Things are a bit rough for these people. I don't know anything other than what's currently being read. I'll probably be a bit lurky because I should get as much reading done before my class. Enjoy reading. Have fun reading. I don't know why Twitch is it's like they have these settings for ads, right? And so they're like, here, you have options. You can choose how you want to run your channel. And then they're like, just kidding. We're going to do it how we want to anyway. Then what's the point of setting the way I want? What's the point? Gotta hop into a meeting, but gonna lurk. Enjoy your lurk, Neff. I hope your meeting goes well. Chapter 10 hype. Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm finally towards the end of chat. I'm very biased against the retellings and the stuff where they add zombies. I'm a purist and that kind of stuff drives me nuts. I can definitely understand that. So I would personally recommend the originals, but I do understand the goal of trying to get new audience into classics. Yeah, I mean, I've read a couple retellings of Disney stories and they were interesting. They obviously were not the same. So I would definitely consider them different stories, different books. So I would probably start with the original anyway, just to get, but okay, so and I don't know anything about Jane Austen's books. Are they written normally, or are they in Old English, or because I know they're classic books. Are they easy reads or not? I've heard of a lot of first babies being early and first babies being late. Oh, okay. So I don't know if there really is a norm. I only do it for certain people. I think Sarah's probably really the only person. Read Pride and Prejudice. Wow, I cannot say this title. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies instead. YouTube has started trying to come for me by pausing my videos and going, ad blockers are not allowed on YouTube. Pay for premium to watch ad free, blah, blah, blah. And I click the, you made a mistake. I don't have an ad blocker. Even though I 100% do. Oh my God, that's too funny. Okay. I think we're going to get on with the next chapter. Chapter 11. Tix Projects. Oh my God. That scared me. Oh my gosh. Chapter 11. Tix Projects. By the month of burning, it was so hot that the people of Ember felt as if they were trapped in a huge oven. The sun blazed down, the grasses dried to a brownish yellow, The roads were deep in dust. People gasped and sneezed and wilted. All they wanted to do was lie down in the shade or wade deep into the cool water of the river. But the work went on as always. In the ferocious heat, they hauled garbage, cleaned out the goat pens, pulled weeds in the fields, shoveled manure. When they flopped down on the ground to rest or stopped every few minutes for a drink of water, the workers of Sparks glared at them and grumbled. They suspected them of being lazy, and that made the people of Ember angry. Resentment increased on both sides until any little accident could flare up into a fight. At the Pioneer Hotel, the mood grew more and more grim. At first, it had been rather fun to live there, especially for the smaller children, who explored the hidden corners of the huge old building, held races in the long corridors, and played colossal games of hide and seek. Lizzie Biscoe liked going to the ladies' room on the ground floor, where there was still a large fragment of mirror attached to the wall. She could see almost her entire self in it, which pleased her on the days when she just wanted to wash her hair in the river or found a bit of colored cloth to use as a ribbon. For the older people, the Pioneer Hotel quickly stopped feeling like a fine adventure. They didn't like sleeping on piles of pine needles and dry grasses wrapped in bedspreads. It annoyed them to have to go to the river for water and to have no indoor bathrooms, only outhouses full of bad smells and spiders. They worried that the candles might set fire to things, and they wanted real windows with glass to keep the bugs out. Almost 2 months had passed since they arrived in Sparks. In about 4 months, they would have to leave. If they didn't like living in the hotel, they knew they'd like even less to start from nothing, somewhere out in the wilderness. They imagined sleeping with no roof over their heads, having no protection at all from the sun or the bugs, and scratching through the grass for something to eat. No one liked the prospect. In the dim hallways, in the roofless, ruined lobby, and in the dusty ballroom, people gathered in little clusters and spoke to each other in worried tones. And sometimes their worry turned to anger and fear. One person, however, did not stand around talking. That was Tick Hassler. When he saw a problem, he did something about it. He'd become a sort of leader around the Pioneer Hotel, just by the force of his personality. He started what he called the Pioneer Hotel Rehabilitation Project. He explained his ideas to anyone who would listen, and the way he explained them made them seem instantly exciting and fun. "Here's what we'll do," he said, the night he announced the first project. It was late evening of a very hot day, nearly dark, and a few people were still sitting out on the steps of the hotel, hoping for a cool breeze. Tick never seemed much affected by the heat. Everyone else was disheveled and sweaty by the end of the day, but Tick always managed to look neat, his hair combed so flat it looked almost polished, his bare arms and legs smooth and brown, his clothes, a plain black t-shirt and black shorts, never torn or stained. He wore sunglasses almost all the time, and they gave him a commanding and slightly mysterious look. Dune was there the night Tick announced his first project. It was a relief, after a hard day, to be part of a group of people who were easy with each other, a group with a common purpose. Several of Dune's classmates from the Ember School were part of it, and some boys who had been cart pullers with Tick, and quite a few others. There were some girls, too. Lizzie was always somewhere around Tick, listening eagerly as he talked, or trotting off on an errand of some sort for him. She had stopped wearing the black scarf that signified her mourning for Looper. "I've been sad long enough," she told Dune. "Besides, Tick doesn't even think black looks good on me." Now she wore her sunglasses all the time. "What we're going to do," said Tick, sitting on the low wall that bordered the steps, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and speaking in a way that made you feel his words were just meant for you, "is get ourselves organized. There's a lot that needs to be done around here." People nodded. "The first thing we need," Tick went on, "is a gathering place. Like the gathering hall back in Ember. And what's the perfect spot for it?" He held out his hands, palms facing the sky, waiting for an answer. No one spoke. "This field, of course." He swept an arm out, taking in the whole of the big field in front of the big hotel, with its rough, weedy ground, scrawny trees, and chunks of concrete and other rubble. "We're going to clear it out. We're going to make it into a grand plaza, better than the one in the village. We can have meetings here, with our leader speaking to us from these steps. We don't have a leader, someone said. But we will someday, once we decide who's best for the job, Tick said. I'm going to start on it tomorrow. Who wants to work with me? And although they had already worked a full day, nearly all of them flung their hands up and volunteered. Dune did too. It wasn't so much that he wanted to clear the field and make a plaza. He wasn't sure they really needed such a thing. After all, they'd be leaving here before long. But he wanted to be a part of this. He didn't want to be left out. The project got off to a great start. 20 or 30 people were out there every morning, pulling up weeds, digging out rubble, and hacking down trees. Tick was always there, working twice as fast and hard as anyone else, and telling them all what terrific progress they were making. It was hard work, but somehow it was fun, too. Then one night, Tick called everyone together and announced that he had a new idea. We won't stop working on the field, he said, but I'm going to take a team out to start on another project. We need to build a platform out over the river. It'll get us out toward the deeper part where we can swim and catch fish, and maybe even launch a boat someday. There might be a lot of places to explore beyond this one. Who wants to work with me? Of course, everyone wanted to switch over to this new project. It sounded much more interesting than clearing the field. And besides, people wanted to be on the same project that Tick was working on. So a great many of them started helping with the new platform, the dock, Tick said it was called. They ripped boards off the old storage sheds behind the hotel. They piled up rocks in the river to make the supports. The field project slowed way down. Hardly anyone was working on it anymore. And as the weeks went on, Dune began to see that this is how Tick's projects went. He would have an idea and get everyone excited about it. They'd start to work. Then after a while, Tick would have an idea for a new project, and everyone would follow him to that one, while the old project withered away. What Tick seemed to like to do was the thrill of something new, and the power of being a leader. This slightly dimmed Dune's admiration for Tick, but no one was perfect after all. Tick had far more energy than most people, and far more ideas, even though they weren't all good ones. In addition to helping with Tick's projects, Dune had plenty of his own projects to keep him busy. In the early mornings, he helped Clary with the garden she'd put near the river. He was working on a way to make watering easier for her. He'd seen a pump the villagers had constructed, which used the river's current to push water out into the channels that watered the fields. This pump was fairly simple, a deep hole in the riverbank with an arrangement of pipes and valves at the bottom. He thought he could figure out how to make one. In the evenings, by the last of the daylight, Dune read. He was choosing books from the room in the back of the Ark every few days now. His choices at first were pretty random. He just grabbed whatever he could reach, but then he'd had a great idea for bringing some of order to his vast collection. One day, when he got back to room 215 after work, he found Edward Pocket standing by the window, frowning at the sky. Edward looked unhappy. His gnarled hands were tightened into fists, and his mouth was bunched up in a twisted knot. "Are you all right?" said Dune. "Oh, I'm fine," said Edward. "I just love sitting around all day doing nothing." "You're bored," said Dune. "Yes," Edward cried. "Yes, yes, yes." He raised both hands and grabbed wads of his frizzled gray hair and stretched his mouth into a mad grin. "They say I'm too old to work, but I'm not ready to freeze up and die. I don't want to spend my days chatting or sleeping." He said the words with contempt. "What am I supposed to do with myself?" And of course, Dune had the answer. It was so obvious he didn't know why he hadn't thought of it before. "I know exactly what you can do," he said, and he told Edward Pocket about the books. Now, Edward spent all the daylight hours in the book room, sorting and organizing and arranging the books. He often picked out ones he thought Dune would like and brought them back to the hotel. In this way, Dune learned about bird migrations, cowboys, basketball, whales, mountain climbing, Egyptian history, dog training, French cooking, car repair, and dinosaurs, among other things. Edward even found a book called Science Projects, in which there was a chapter that explained how to do an experiment that made electricity. The experiment required things Dune didn't have, but he kept the book anyway in case he ever got them. You never knew what was going to turn up in the loads the roamers brought to town. In the meantime, Tick carried on tirelessly with his projects. The dock never did get built. It kept getting torn apart by the river's current, but other projects succeeded. One of Tick's ideas was to hoist the flag of Ember over the Pioneer Hotel. Lottie Hoover, who had worked in one of Ember's city offices, had rolled the flag up and tucked it into her bag just before she rushed down into the pipeworks to leave. Dune didn't really see the point of flying Ember's flag over the hotel. Everyone knew that it was the people of Ember who lived there, but he helped with the project, sawing the limbs off a tall, thin tree to make a flagpole. Soon the flag of the city of Ember, deep blue with a yellow grid, flapped above the Pioneer. Beautiful, said Tick, gazing up at it. He turned to the people gathered around him. We have to show them, he said, that we're proud of being the people of Ember. They have all the advantages right now. They control the food. They control the work teams. They're taller than we are and stronger. But we can't let any of that matter. If we want them to respect us, we have to respect ourselves. Several days later, as Dune was walking through the plaza, he noticed that a flag was also flying from the tower of the town hall. It was black with a spray of orange dots rising from the corner. Sparks, Dune thought. He wondered if they'd had this flag all along, or if someone had made it and put it up after seeing the one at the Pioneer Hotel. End of chapter 11. Heck yes. Right at the start of an ad break. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. All right, let me scroll back up a little bit. They're not written in Old English. They're from the early 19th century. I would say it takes some getting used to, but once you get into the flow, it's easy and fun, other than a few vocab words here and there. Okay. I'll give up on YouTube before I give them money. Heck yes. It just annoys the heck out of me that they have enough information about my computer that they know I have an ad blocker. Oh, that's true. It's only a matter of time before I get a VPN. I've been thinking about a VPN too, but mainly so I can watch streaming services from other locations. You got cut off. Oh, really? When saying ad break? That's so funny. I need another good stretch. I think we're doing pretty good on timing too, because I've been live reading for about an hour. And to kind of go with the same length, we need to read at least one more chapter today, which is perfect. We might even be able to fit one after that. We'll see. So, oh my God. Summer. Thank you for the who's there. Oh my God.
And shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul, seal your doom tonight.
And thank you for the spooky, scary skeletons. I love those alerts so much. Also, feel free to use channel points to suggest an emote you might want to see me have. You can suggest one per stream, and it is going to possibly get involved in my Streamiversary, which is coming up really soon. Actually, it's coming up in, I think, 2 weeks, which is crazy. Which is really crazy. The Door Creak is so spooky. I know. I think that one and the Thunderclap one are like the scariest for the channel points ones. I love it though. Oh, I need another yawn. Okay. Let's get reading. Chapter 12. Casper arrives with a surprise. Lena was sweeping the floor of the kitchen when she heard the thump and shuffle of hooves outside. There was a shout, in a man's voice, "Hello, where is everyone?" And then a shriek from inside the house, running footsteps, and Torin's voice screaming, "Casper, Casper, you're home!" Lena flung down the broom and dashed to the door. There was Torin, clamped onto the front of a very large man who was rumpling Torin's hair and thumping him on the back. Behind the man was his truck, an especially large one, piled high with boxes and crates, pulled behind two huge oxen with curved horns. They stood breathing noisily, their sides going in and out. "Well, small brother," said Casper, "glad to see me?" "Yes," said Torin. He unwrapped his arms from around his brother's trunk and gazed up at his face. "You were gone so long this time." "I had to extend my route," said Casper. "Quite far, in fact. Quite far." The work of a roamer gets harder every year. Lena could see Casper's resemblance to his brother, Torin. They both had the same small eyes and the same wispy light brown hair. But while Torin was narrow, Casper was wide. He had a wide, round, rosy pink face with a glistening round chin. It was almost a babyish looking face, except for the tiny mustache on the upper lip, twisted at both ends into points. Dr. Hester, who had been picking peas, came out from the side of the house. "Welcome back, traveler," she said. "Auntie Hester," cried Casper, flinging his arms wide. He stood that way while Dr. Hester walked toward him, and when she came close, he gave her a hug that lifted her feet in their dusty slippers off the ground. "Don't do that," she said, her face squashed against Casper's shoulder. He dropped her back down. "Can't help it," he said. "You're light as a feather." "I'm not either," said the doctor, rubbing her neck. "You're just showing off your muscles." "Well," said Casper, "it's true that being a roamer builds muscles." He made a fist and flexed his meaty arm back and forth. "Heavy things to lift, you know. Some exceedingly heavy." "Out near the Camp Range foothills a few months ago, I got stuck in the mud and had to lift the whole back end of the truck, which was loaded at the time with..." Torin jumped up and down at Casper's side. "Did you bring me a surprise?" Casper looked startled. "A surprise?" "Yes, the way you always do. A surprise for me." For a second, Lena felt sorry for Torin. The look on his face was so hopeful. She had a feeling that Casper was more important to Torin than Torin was to Casper. Casper laughed. He had the oddest laugh. Heh 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 heh. All on one high squeaky note. It was hardly a sound of pleasure at all. "Well," he said, "as it happens, I did bring one surprise. It's more of a surprise for everyone, though." He looked back toward his truck. "Are you there?" he called. "Right here," answered a gruff voice. From behind the truck stepped a woman almost as big as Casper himself. A massive tree trunk of a woman, with swirls and tangles of red-brown hair falling to her shoulders. She was dressed in faded blue pants and a huge brown shirt. She looked at them, smiling slightly. Her eyes were blue and fierce. "This is Maddie," said Casper. "She's my roaming partner." From Torin, there was silence. Dr. Hester held out her hand and said, "Welcome." The big woman pumped the doctor's hand firmly up and down 3 times, and then Dr. Hester glanced toward the house and saw Lena standing in the doorway. "Casper," she said, turning back to him, "have you heard about what's happened since you've been gone? About the people who came here from the underground city?" "I heard some tale like that," said Casper. "Lena is one of them," Dr. Hester said. "Come here, Lena." Lena walked out toward Casper, who squinted at her and then thrust a hand into the pocket of his pants and pulled out a pair of slightly bent glasses, which he put on. He peered at her through their cracked lenses as she approached. When she got close, he held out an enormous hand. Lena shook it. "Underground, eh?" said Casper. The cloudy glasses made his eyes look bigger and dimmer. "Some sort of mole people? But you've got no fur." He laughed his squeaky laugh again. Heh heh heh. Lena smiled politely at his stupid joke. Something about Casper seemed to be slightly off, she thought. "Lena's sister, Poppy, is with us as well," said Dr. Hester, went on. "And their guardian, Mrs. Murdo." During all this, Torin had been standing very still. His narrow face had closed down. His eyes looked like tiny stones, and his mouth was pinched small. He was staring at Maddie. Suddenly he cried, "But I'm supposed to be your partner." Casper blinked at him, as if he had already forgotten he was there. "You," he said. "You're much too young." "I'm almost 11, Torin yelled. "I'm big enough." "Not quite, little brother," Casper said. He grinned at Maddie, who gazed back at him calmly. She was like a big rock, Lena thought. Her face didn't move. Torin scowled. "Don't call me little," he shouted. He turned and ran toward the house. Casper watched him go, lifting his eyebrows slightly. "It's hard for children to accept change," he said, "but they must learn, mustn't they?" Dr. Hester said, "Our 3 guests have been sleeping in the loft, Casper. They'll have to sleep in the main room while you're here." She paused. "How long do you think you'll stay?" "Just a night or 2, said Casper. His face took on a serious look. "I'm on a particular mission this time, heading for the city." "The city?" thought Lena. "What city?" The doctor echoed her thought. "The city," she said. "Why in the world would you go there?" She seemed astonished, as if she'd never heard before of anyone going to the city. "Because of this particular mission," Casper said, "of a secret nature." "I see," said Dr. Hester. "All right, then. It's nearly time to eat. Take your beasts down to the barn, and then come on in." That night, Casper talked a great deal about his exploits as a roamer. "In the northern forest lands," he said, "I came upon some old cabins that still had glass in the windows. It was quite a trick to get the glass out without breaking it. It took 4 days, but I managed. Did cut my hand a bit." He extended his large hand and pointed out a tiny scar on the palm. "Quite a lot of blood from that. Then up near Hogmarsh, I found a very valuable item." He gazed around them, smiling slightly. "What was it?" asked Torin, who had forgotten for the moment to be mad at his brother. "An ancient statue," said Casper. "It depicts some very rare sort of bird, with a long neck and only 1 leg. You can see that it had once been painted pink." He paused to let the wonder of this sink in. "Pink, tink, stink," said Poppy. "Pinky, stinky." She stared at Casper and giggled. "Hush, Poppy," said Lena. "Then, in Ardenwood," Casper went on, idly twisting his tiny mustache, "I had to fend off a few bandits." "Bandits!" cried Torin. "Really?" "Well, they might as well have been bandits," Casper said. "Turned out they had no weapons, but they were set on stealing from me, so that's for sure. I got rid of them fast, with a few well-placed lashes." Casper sliced his arm through the air as if he were cracking a whip. "And a good thing, too," he went on, "because not far from there I located another special thing. Several boxes of authentic, pre-disaster artificial flowers. They're made of very fine cloth, hardly faded at all." "Artificial flowers?" said Lena, wondering why the people of Sparks would want fake flowers when they had real ones growing everywhere. "Yes," said Casper. "I have a sort of knack for finding unusual things." Maddie didn't join much in the conversation. Once Mrs. Murdo, being polite, asked her if she too enjoyed being a roamer, but she only smiled a little and said, "I don't mind it. There are worse things to be." Mrs. Murdo waited to hear about the worst things, but it seemed that was all she was going to say. When it was bedtime, Casper went up into the loft and Torin dashed up after him. Maddie took Torin's place in the medicine room, saying a brief good night and closing the door firmly after her. The doctor helped Lena and Mrs. Murdo make beds of pads and blankets on the couch and on the floor. "It sounds interesting to be a roamer," Lena said. "I suppose so," said the doctor. "And Casper has a special knack for finding things." The doctor bent over and spoke softly into Lena's ear. "He has a knack for finding the wrong things," she said. "He's always bringing loads of things people already have and not finding the things people really need." "Artificial flowers," she said wearily. "What are we going to do with artificial flowers?" The bed being made up, she went around the room and blew out the candles, all but one. "He's always been a bit odd," said the doctor. "Looks as if he's gotten even odder since he was last here. He tries hard, though. You can say that for him. He has high ambitions. He wants to be a famous roamer. He doesn't know that he's a bit famous already among the other roamers, but not the famous way he'd like." She handed the last candle to Lena and stumped off to her room. The next day was strange and unpleasant. Casper sat in the big armchair telling stories about his adventures while Torin hovered around him asking questions. Lena listened for a while. She was curious about this work of roaming. It sounded exciting, like something she might want to do herself. But she soon got bored because it seemed to her that Casper never said too much about the really interesting parts of his adventures. She wanted to hear what the faraway places were like, and how the old buildings looked, and everything that was in the buildings. But all Casper talked about was how brave and clever he'd been to find the things he found, and what injuries he'd suffer in finding them. Maddie didn't listen to Casper. She spent most of her time in the courtyard or the garden, motionless and silent, gazing at the plants, her arms folded across her wide waist. Every now and then, she plucked a leaf or blossom, rubbed it between her fingers, and sniffed it. Once, she asked Lena what a certain plant was. "I'm not sure," Lena said. "I only know a few of them." "Then you know more than I do," said Maddie, flashing Lena an unexpected smile. But other than that, she said almost nothing to anyone. She didn't seem angry or unhappy, just off in her own world. Lena wondered about her, but felt too shy to ask questions. After a while, Casper shooed Torin away, sat down at the table, and pulled some scraps of paper from his pocket. He spread them out and bent over them, and his jovial, boastful manner changed. He ran his finger along the lines of writing on the papers. He wrote on them with a stubby pencil, and as he did so, he frowned and muttered and mumbled to himself, words that sounded like nonsense to Lena, except for an occasional string of numbers. "Biggle 3578, he would say. "Thribnim Mulglum 44209. She wandered up behind him and tried to look over his shoulder. After all, she had experience with torn documents and hard-to-decipher bits of writing. But Casper twisted around and scowled at her, holding his hands over the papers. "Private, private, keep away," he said. He wouldn't let Torin see either, so Torin sat on the window seat and sulked. Around mid-afternoon, the doctor rushed in the door, looking even more frazzled than usual. Her shirt was smudged with blood, and her shirt tails were half tucked in and half not. "I'm out of clean bandages," she said. "Lena, did you do them? I need some, and I need that lavender extract, a bottle of it." "No, I'd better get 2 bottles." She hurried into the medicine room. Lena had forgotten all about the bandages. She dashed into the kitchen, pulled some rags from the basket, and tore them into strips. She took these to the doctor, who was on her knees, rummaging through a chest. "And," said the doctor, "I'm going to have to make some mustard plasters tonight. You'll need to go out into the orchard and gather me some mustard flowers. I'll need a lot. Get the leaves too, and the roots. I want the whole plant." She found her bottles of oil, thrust them into her bag along with the bandages, and rushed out the door again. Lena felt her spirits sink down into her shoes. She didn't want to gather mustard plants. It was too hot. It was ferociously hot. She was sick of being hot, having her neck damp beneath her long hair, and her clothes sticking to her back. She was sick of doing chores. She shuffled out into the courtyard, where a few of the doctor's seedlings were drying up in their pots. She trudged to the pump, filled a bucket, and splashed some water on each limp plant. Then she sat down in the shade of the grapevine and leaned against the wall beneath the window and thought about everything that was wrong. She was mad at the doctor for giving her so much work to do and hardly noticing when she did it. She was mad at Mrs. Murdo for not moving them out to the Pioneer Hotel. And she was lonely. She missed being with people she knew. Especially she missed being with Dune in the old way, the way that they'd been together when they were partners in Ember. Now he seemed to care more for his new friends than he did for her. Every time she thought about him, she felt a thud of pain, like a bruised place inside her. From the window just above her head, Lena heard Casper's voice. "Not now," he said. I have to do some planning. I need quiet." The door opened, and Torin stormed out. He threw a furious glance at Lena, but didn't speak. He ran through the gate and up the road. He's mad too, thought Lena. Everyone is mad. From inside, she heard Casper's voice again, startlingly near. He was talking to Maddie, who must have come into the kitchen door. Lena realized they were standing by the window just behind her. "We'll head out day after tomorrow," said Casper, starting early. "Uh-huh," said Maddie in her low, growly voice. "All those stories about germs still lurking there," Casper said. "They're nonsense, you know. Those germs died out long ago." "No doubt you're right," said Maddie. "They were talking about the city." Lena sat very still and listened harder. People talk about other kinds of danger there, too, Casper went on. Bandits and so on. Doesn't bother me. Of course not, Maddie said. And anyway, even if there is danger, said Casper, it's worth the risk because of what we're going to find. You sound very sure that we're going to find it, said Maddie. Of course I'm sure, said Casper. Aren't you? The answer to this was just a grunt. They moved away from the window, and their voices grew fainter. Maddie spoke next. Lena couldn't hear all of what she said, but she caught the words, how far? And in Casper's answer, she heard the words, day's journey. Then she heard steps clomping up the stairs to the loft, and the room went quiet. Lena sat very still. Her bad mood faded. Other thoughts swirled in her mind. She was remembering the sparkling city whose picture she had drawn so many times, the great city of light, the city she had always believed in. Now Casper was planning to go there. It wasn't dangerous anymore, and it was only a day's journey away. She knew, of course, that the city Casper was talking about had been damaged, like everything else in the disaster. The beautiful, shining city she had imagined must have been this city in the past, in the time before the disaster. In her mind, she revised her vision of the city. Some of the high towers would have toppled, and their windows would be broken. Stones from the ruined buildings would have fallen into the street. Roofs would have caved in. But the idea that struck her was this. Maybe the people of Ember were meant to restore the city. Perhaps their great job, the reason they had come up into this new world, was to live in the city and rebuild it so that once again it was the glorious shining city of Lena's vision. This was such a beautiful idea. That night, she lay in bed thinking about it, and the more she thought, the more sure she was, and the more excited. End of chapter 12. And I'll give it a few seconds because it looks like we're right in the middle of an ad break. It's almost like the ads are like almost perfectly aligned with the chapters. Or seems to be so. Okay. Casper out here bragging about his muscles the second he shows up. Oh my god, I know. Casper is already a character. A man found a lawn flamingo and called it an ancient statue. I mean, technically it is to them, right? An ancient statue. I know, imagine. He just shows up with like this plastic lawn flamingo that's like old and not really pink anymore. It's like this ancient relic is so amazing. And artificial flowers. Like, yeah, cool. We got some decorations, not anything useful. Good job, Casper, the friendly roamer. Love that. And I think we'll have time for one more chapter today. We've already read 4, which is good. And actually that'll be perfect. If we read one more chapter, that'll be perfect because that'll be the end of the first part of the book. So I think that will be awesome. He's got a real eye for treasure. Speed reading right now. Oh my gosh. I know, right? We're going through it. I'm loving it. And it really is making me feel better. So I appreciate it. I hope you guys are enjoying, having fun, appreciating it. Because it's really good. I think it's really good. How many parts does this book have? Let me see. 3 parts. There are 3 parts. And it looks like the last part is shorter. Yeah, the first part looks to be the longest. Yeah, the first part's the longest. And then the second part, and then the third part is pretty short. I'm appreciating the reading. I'm glad. Listen, Mrs. Norris, that's a lie because Twitch is making you lie, okay? It's not true. It's like a minute every like 20 minutes or something like that. I don't even know. That sounds right though. A minute of ads every 20 minutes. All right, let's get moving with our last chapter of the day. Okay. So chapter 13, taking action. One evening, Dune wandered off by himself toward the far corner of the hotel, where the trees grew thickly and the undergrowth beneath them was dense. He made his way into the woods to the thickest of vines, all woven together like thorny ropes. Little lumpy fruits, some red and some black, grew on these vines. Dune had already discovered that the red ones were hard and sour, but if left to ripen, they turned black and sweet. He had been checking the vines regularly. Each day there were more and more of the black ones. Today, he saw there were more blackberries than red. He began picking them. Some he ate right off the vine. They were sweet and juicy. Others he put in a basket he'd brought with him to take back to the others in room 215. He heard footsteps behind him. A voice he recognized instantly called out, "Dune!" He turned around, and there was Tick striding toward him, smiling his dazzling smile. Dune stood up. He'd been squatting to reach for the berries on the lowest vines. "Look what I found," he said, holding out a handful of berries to Tick. Tick took one and popped it in his mouth. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Terrific," he said. He took the rest of them from Dune's palm. "So," he said, "are you going to save us again?" "Save us?" said Dune, confused. "Yes, from starvation. You're the hero of Ember. It's about time for you to save us again." It flustered Dune to be called a hero. He wasn't sure if Tick was admiring him or making fun of him. He couldn't think of what to say next. Tick reached into the thicket and plucked a few berries for himself. "These are good," he said. "Mind if I take some?" "They don't belong to me," said Dune. "Anyone can have them." Tick hunted among the vines for a while, picking berries and popping them into his mouth. Then he said, "You know that building they call the Ark?" Dune nodded. "Ever been in it?" "No," said Dune. "Just in the separate room at the back. They have books in there. You should see them. There must be thousands." Tick didn't comment on the books. "I went in there the other day," he said. "They had me carry in a few crates of pickled beets. It's their storehouse, you know. They say that they're short on food." "Ha!" Tick gave a laugh that was more like a bark. "That place is full of food." "Really?" said Dune. "Really," said Tick, tossing 3 berries into his mouth. "There's jars of preserved fruit and sacks of dried fruit and every kind of pickle and bags of corn, loads and loads of food. And we get limp carrots for our dinners. I believe there's a bit of stinginess going on." Dune frowned. He thought of his father looking with dismay last night at the scanty contents of his dinner parcel. He thought about what Ordney had said at lunch the week before. "We just don't have enough for 400 extra people." Was this untrue after all? Tick had moved a few steps away and found a patch that was thick with berries. He was picking them rapidly, eating each one. When he spoke, his words sounded a little juicy. "I don't know about you," he said, "but I don't like unfairness." "I don't either," said Dune. He walked over to Tick and offered him the handful of berries he just collected. Tick took them all. "I believe an unfair situation needs to be corrected," Tick said. "Corrected how?" Tick wiped his red-stained fingers on his pants. "Well," he said, "there's something we have to figure out." "We?" thought Dune. He liked that. Though he'd stopped taking part so often in Tick's projects, still he admired Tick's energy and felt his power. He was glad Tick had sought him out. He was glad that Tick seemed to consider him different from the others, smarter, more important. "You're right," he said. "We should do something." Tick nodded. "I don't trust these Sparks people," he said. "In some ways, they seem very primitive. Do you know that they make fire by hitting 2 stones together?" "They do?" Dune hadn't seen anyone starting a fire, since he was rarely in kitchens. He knew that the fire in the bakery was kept going all the time. He'd seen people going in there sometimes, carrying candles that had gone out. "They don't have matches," he said. "Sometimes they do," said Tick, "but not always. Matches seem to be rare." "We should give them some of ours," said Dune. All the people who'd come out of Ember had matches they were supplied with the boats. The Emberites had hundreds of matches. Oh, I don't think so, Tick said quickly. We need them. We have to keep them for ourselves. Dune wondered why, when they had so many, but he thought maybe matches figured somehow in Tick's plans. So you're with me? Said Tick. Sure, said Dune. Then he hesitated. With you in what? Action, said Tick. You took action before when there was an urgent situation. We may need to take action again pretty soon. Dune still didn't know what Tick had in mind, but he asked no more questions. Tick had a way of letting you know that he'd given all the answers he was going to give. All right, Dune said, I'm with you. Good, said Tick. He held out his hand and Dune shook it. Tick grinned and walked away. Dune watched him lope across the field. For a moment, he was lost in his thoughts. Food in the storehouse, stinginess, unfairness. Figure something out. You're with me. When he came to himself again and glanced down at his hands, he was startled to see them streaked with blood. He had scratched himself on the thorns of the vines. It took him a second to realize that what looked like blood was only berry juice, passed to his hand from Tick's. Lena made a plan. She'd hide among the boxes and crates on Casper's truck, and she would ride that way to the city. It was only a day's journey away. Surely she'd be able to find a way back. There must be other roamers on the roads. Of course, she could just ask Casper if she could go with him, but she was sure he'd say no. He was on some kind of important business. He wouldn't want to be bothered with her. It was best to go secretly. Once she had seen the city, she would know if it was the place where the people of Ember were destined to live. She was sure she would know as soon as she saw it. Then she could hop out of the truck and find her way back. Casper might never even see her at all. The next day, she tore a part of a blank page out of one of the doctor's books and wrote this note. Dear Mrs. M, I have gone with Casper and Maddie on the truck. I will be back in 2 days, or maybe 3. There is something important I want to find out. Also, I need a change from here. See you soon. Love, Lena. Her plan was to wait until that night, when Mrs. Murdo was asleep, and tuck the note between the pages of the ancient, crumbling book she had been reading, something called Charlotte's Web. She kept urging Lena to look at it, but Lena said she wasn't that interested in spiders. It would be better for Dune. Mrs. Murdo read only in the evening, so Lena would have at least a day's head start before anyone knew where she was. A few doubts about her plan lurked in the back of Lena's mind. She knew Mrs. Murdo would worry about her, Poppy would miss her, and Lena didn't really like Casper or trust him, and she knew that he and Maddie would probably be angry if they found out that she had come along. It was a bit of a risky journey she was embarking on. But anything truly important involved risks, didn't it? She had taken a huge risk before, in the last days of Ember, and it had been the right thing to do. So probably this was the right thing too. She was so sure the city was their destination, and she was so determined to see the city for herself, that she turned her mind away from her doubts. It would have been an adventure, she told herself. She would be fine. She got up before the sun the next morning. She crept out of her bed on the floor, one tiny motion at a time. Poppy didn't stir, nor did Mrs. Murdo in her bed on the couch. In the half-darkness, Lena put her clothes on and pulled the pillowcase bag she'd packed the night before from its hiding place on the window seat. She tucked her note between the pages of Mrs. Murdo's book. Then, carrying her bag, she opened the door so softly it made no noise and went out into the courtyard. Just beyond the gate, the truck was standing ready. The oxen weren't attached to it yet. They were down the road at the barn, to be brought later by the stable hand. Lena climbed onto the back of the truck. Its metal bottom was gritty with dust and bits of dry grass. It was loaded with 4 large barrels, 2 bicycles strapped together, a box full of tubs and buckets, and 4 big wooden crates made of slats of wood spaced about an inch apart. The crates were taller than Lena and about 4 feet square, like small rooms almost. 3 of them were full of goods to be sold, but the 4th was empty. Its contents had been sold in sparks. That one would be Lena's hiding place. Getting into it was easy. First, she tossed her bag over the side, and then she climbed up the slats as if they were a ladder and jumped down in. The wood was rough and splintery, but she had prepared for that. She'd brought a small blanket from her bed. She spread this on the bottom of the crate and lay down on it, using her bags of supplies as a pillow. She was sure that if she lay very still, no one would see her. And she was right. An hour or so later, she didn't know for sure how long, but the sun was now shining through the slats in the crate, and she could feel its warmth on her back. She heard the clatter of the gate latch and voices, Torrance first. "But I would be helpful," he said in a tearful, desperate wail. "I would. I know how to tie knots, and I can—" "Now that's enough," said Casper. "You're not coming with us. Get it through your hard little head. You're not old enough. Roaming is a dangerous business. It's not for children." "She gets to go," Torrance said. "Of course. She's not a child. She's my partner." Lena felt a jolt as the box holding Casper's and Maddie's belongings was heaved up onto the truck. "Here comes Joe with the oxen, right on time," said Casper. The truck squeaked and trembled as the oxen were hitched to it. Lena heard the gate latch clatter again, and then the doctor's voice. "When will you be back this way?" "Not for a while." The truck slanted as Casper got on. "Several months is my guess. We've got a big route planned out." "You should be taking me," cried Torrin. "You'll be sorry you didn't. I'll tell on you. I'll tell Uncle." Casper chuckled. "Uncle would not be interested," he said. "He's much too busy, always has been." There was the crack of a whip. "Goodbye, little brother," Casper called, and the truck jolted forward. And that is the end of that chapter and the end of part 1.